My Kid's Dog by John Hanson. My kid's dog died. Sparky. I hated that dog. The feeling was mutual. We got off on the wrong foot. Whining in his pen those first nights, my squirt gun in his face and him blinking from the water, and then the holes in the yard, so-called accidents in the house, his nose snuffling into my trousers, him slurping my drink or sneaking bites of my sandwich when I fell asleep on the sofa. Also, his inability to fetch, to take a joke, to find the humor in sudden air horns, to be handled, roughhoused, or teased, and then the growling, the skulking, the snapping at my ankles, the hiding from me under the house, and literally thousands of abject refusals to obey. Like, who the hell are you? You'd have thought he was a cat. When pushed to the brink, I shouted, "I'll cut your face off and show it to you." And the small-brained mammal just stared at me. But with the kids or my wife, little Fufu was a changeling, conning them with the tail, the prance, the peppiness, the soft chocolate eyes, the sloppy expressions of love, the easy tricks that if I performed, I'd get no credit for. We understood each other all right. I was on to him. And then, at age 10, and none too soon, he kicked the bucket. You'd think that would be it. End of story. But no, he had to get even. Those who have tears, prepare to shed them. I was futzing with the hinges on the front yard gate on a Saturday afternoon, my sleeves rolled up and mind off in Oklahoma, when I noticed Fido in the California shade, snoozing, but for once a little wistful too, and far more serene than he usually was in my presence. I tried to surprise him with my standard shout, but it was a no-go. So I walked over and prodded the little guy with my shoe. Nothing doing. And not so much as a flutter in his oddly abstracted face. Surely this was the big sleep, I thought. She who must be obeyed was at the mall, so I was safe from objection or inquiry on that account. I then made an inventory of my kids. Buzz away at college, Zach in the netherworld of the surf shop, Suze, my last kid, on her bike and somewhere with her cousin. Were I to bury Rover with due haste, I could avoid the waterworks. Even convince them that he'd signed up with the circus, run afoul of Cruella de Vil. Anything but died. I got a green tarp from the garage and laid it out on the front lawn, where I hesitated before using my shoe to roll Spot into his funeral shroud, then dragged him back into the garden where Summer's dying zucchini plants were in riot. With trusty spade, I dug his burial place, heaped earth atop him, and tamped it down with satisfying whoops. I was feeling good about myself, heroic, as if, miraculously, compassion and charity had invaded not only my bones, but my soft muscle tissues. I fixed myself a tall glass and watched the first quarter of the USC football game. And then pangs of conscience got me. Hadn't my investigation of the death of Precious been rather cursory? Wouldn't I myself closely cross-examine a suspect whose emotions were clouded, whose nefarious wishes were well established, whose veterinary skills were without credential? The innocence of my childhood had been spoiled with the tales of Edgar Allan Poe, so it was not difficult to conjure images of Scruffy clawing through the tarp and earth as he fought for one last gasp of air. I marched out to the garden with my spade, and with great backstrain, exhumed our darling lapdog. Considering the circumstances, he seemed none the worse for wear, but I did detect a marked inability to respirate, which I took as a sign either of his stubbornness or of his having crossed the Rainbow Bridge. The latter seemed more likely. I heard in my fuddled head a line from The Wild Bunch when a critically injured gunman begs his outlaw gang to finish it. And, in the healing spirit of Hippocrates, I lifted high the shovel and wanged it down on Harvey's head. To my relief, Not a whimper issued from him. I was confident he was defunct. With care, I shrouded and buried him again, committing earth to earth and dust to dust, and so on, and with sprite like step conveyed myself to the kitchen, where I made another drink and settled into the game's third quarter. I was shocked awake by the ringing telephone, which I, with due caution, answered. It was my wife's friend Vicky inquiring about the pooch, for it was her assertion that Snip had fancied a taste of her son's upper calf, and, without invitation or permission to do so, had partaken of it within the last 24 hours. Even while I was wondering what toxicity lurked in the child's leg, and to what extent the poison was criminally responsible for our adored pet's death, a loss we would feel for our lifetimes, Vicky insisted that I have the dog checked out by a vet to determine if he had rabies. Cause of death, rabies? Seemed unlikely. Notwithstanding his surliness, there'd been no Cujo-esque frothing or lunging at car windows. But my familiarity with the courts had made me careful in confrontation with the plaintiff, and so I assured the complainant that I would do as she asked. Off to the backyard again, my pace that of a woebegone trudge, and with my implement of agriculture, I dug up the slack and loosened earth. This was getting old. With an accusatory tone, I said, "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" And I took his silence as a guilty plea. My plan, of course, was to use the car to transport my burden to the canine's autopsy at Dr. Cathy's office just a half mile away. However, upon settling into its plush front seat, it came to my attention that Zack had not thought to replenish the fuel he'd used up on his trip to the Hollywood Bowl on the previous night. The vehicle would not ferry us farther than a block. With Buster lying in the altogether on the driveway, not yet unsightly, but no portrait, I went into the house and found an old leather suitcase in the attic, then stuffed the mutt into the larger flapped compartment before hefting him on his final journey to those veterinary rooms he always shivered in. I am, as I may have implied, a man of depth and nearly Olympian strength, but I found myself hauling my heavy and lifeless cargo to Dr. Cathy's with a pronounced lack of vigor and resolve. The September afternoon was hot. The Pasadena streets were vacant. The entire world seemed to have found entertainment in ways that I had not. I was, in a word, in a sweaty snit, and after many panting and pain-filled stops, my spine in Quasimodo configuration and my right arm gradually inching longer than my left, it was all I could do to not heave the suitcase containing Wonder Dog into a dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant. But during our joint ordeal, I had developed a grudging affection for our pet, he who'd been so quick to defend my kin against the noise of passing trucks, who took loud notice of the squirrels outside, who held fast in the foyer, hackles raised, fearlessly barking whenever company arrived at the front door. With him, I seemed calm and masterful. Without him, I thought, I would be otherwise. I put down the suitcase to shake the ache from my fingers and ease my back. And it was then that my final indignity came. An angel of mercy spied my plight, braked his ancient Cadillac, and got out. His facial piercings and tattoos and shoot the marble's eyes belying the kindness and decency of his heart as he asked, "Can I help you with that suitcase?" "I can handle it." "Are you sure?" "I'm just 2 blocks away." "What the heck's in it?" he asked. And for some reason, I said, "A family heirloom." "Wow," he said. "Why don't you put it in my trunk and I'll help you with it? I ain't got nothing better to do." Well, I did not just fall off the turnip truck. I would have been, in other circumstances, suspicious. But I was all too aware of the weight and worthlessness of my burden, and so I accepted his offer, hoisting the deceased into the Seville and slamming down the trunk lid. And, in evidence of our fallen state, my Samaritan immediately took off without me, hooting and peeling rubber and speeding west towards Los Angeles. I could only lift my hand in a lazy wave. So long, old sport. It was only right that my last kid should pedal up to me on her bike just then and ask, "Daddy, what are you doing here?" Waving to a guy, I thought, who's going to be rather surprised soon. And then I confessed. Spot's sudden death, the burial, not the exhumation and execution attempt, but the accusation of rabies, and my efforts to clear his reputation with a trip to the vets. Suze took it in with calmness for a little while, but then the lip quivered and the tears spilled from her gorgeous eyes, and as I held her close, she begged me to get another dog, just like Sparky. And that was Sparky's final revenge, for I said, "Okay, honey, another dog, just like him."